The room was all glass, all power, and all silence. 40 floors above the noise of the city, the men who moved money sat behind laptops worth more than most people's cars. $1 million contracts glowed on screens. Decisions that would reshape entire companies were being finalized with the calm efficiency of men who had never once worried about paying rent. Grant Harrington sat at the head of the table, the way he always did, like the room had been built around him. Broad-shouldered. Jaw set. Eyes cold enough to frost the glass. His silence alone could end a negotiation. His name alone made investors straighten their spines. No one spoke unless Grant spoke first. That was the rule. That was always the rule. And then, the door flew open. Not with the measured push of an executive assistant. Not with the cautious entry of a junior partner. The door crashed open the way only one kind of person opens a door, a person who has no idea they're walking into a room they were never supposed to enter. A little girl in a yellow cardigan came sprinting across the polished floor. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble. Her ponytail flew sideways. She had a crayon drawing crumpled in one fist, a juice box in the other, and absolutely zero fear in her eyes. She ran straight past 2 security guards, who both, somehow, did not stop her, and threw her arms around Grant Harrington, the most powerful man in the room. She pressed her face into his chest like she'd done it 1,000 times. Like she knew him. Like she belonged there. And in a voice that cut through every billion-dollar plan on every glowing screen in that room, she said 4 words. "You're my daddy. I found you." The boardroom went dead quiet. Not the quiet of respect. The quiet of shock. The kind of silence that happens when reality cracks open in front of a room full of people who thought they understood the world. Grant Harrington's hand, the hand that had signed deals, fired executives, and never once trembled, hovered in the air above her head. Unsure. Frozen. He didn't push her away. He didn't catch her. He just stood there. Like a man who had stepped onto a bridge he hadn't known existed, and now wasn't sure if it would hold. At the doorway, breathless and white as paper, stood a woman in a janitor's uniform. Her name tag read, Elena, Night Maintenance. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were huge. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. Lily, come here right now." But Lily wasn't moving. She tilted her face up, big brown eyes, one missing front tooth, the kind of fearless gaze that only children and saints manage, and looked straight at Grant. "Everyone's scared of you," she said. "But I'm not. You look like you need a hug." Somewhere in the room, someone made the mistake of starting to laugh. The sound died in their throat when Grant's eyes cut sideways. He didn't laugh. He didn't yell. He didn't do any of the things a man like Grant Harrington was supposed to do when his boardroom was invaded by a 6-year-old child who had just called him daddy in front of his senior leadership team. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. Like she'd cracked open a door he had welded shut years ago, back when his wife Claire died, and the warmth drained out of him for good. Grant raised one hand. Not to threaten. Not to wave Elena away. He raised it to stop the room. "Cancel the meeting," he said. His voice was low. Final. Everyone out. No one asked why. They just gathered their things and filed out, stealing glances at the little girl who had somehow walked into the coldest boardroom in Midtown and made it breathe. "What's your name?" Grant asked. "Lily," she said, still not letting go. "And I didn't mean to mess up your work. I had to find you." Something moved across Grant's face. Something no one in that building had seen in years. He glanced at Elena, really looked at her, the way powerful men sometimes forget to look at people who clean their floors, and something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Both of you." And just like that, the coldest man in the building walked out of his own boardroom, holding a little girl's hand. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, before we go any further, I want you to sit with something. Because this story isn't really about a little girl who ran into a boardroom. It isn't really about a billionaire who canceled his meeting. This story is about what happens when truth finds its way into a building full of people trying to bury it. This story asks questions you already know, even if you've never said them out loud. Why do the powerful sometimes go cold? What happens to a person when grief swallows them whole? And what does it take, really take, to crack open a human heart that has spent years learning to function without warmth? There's a little girl at the center of this story who will answer all of those questions. But not in the way you'd expect. Because Lily Parker didn't have a master plan. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have receipts or DNA results or a court order. She had a crayon drawing and the most terrifying weapon a child can carry. She had the truth. And in a building where everyone was lying, or at least hiding something, a 6-year-old with the truth turned out to be the most dangerous person in the room. By the time this story is over, you'll have watched one woman get framed, one child run a rescue mission, and one man remember how to feel again. You'll also watch a family, the greedy, polished, entitlement-wearing kind, get exactly what they deserve. So let me ask you a question before we go on. Have you ever walked into a room where you didn't belong, not because you crashed it, but because no one ever thought to invite you? Where you could feel the air change the moment people realized you were there? Where every eye in the room was calculating your worth before you'd even spoken? If you have, this story is for you. And if you haven't, this story is still for you. Because one day, you might be standing at that door. Now let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Lily walking into that boardroom meant, we have to understand what her mother Elena walked into 6 months earlier, on her very first night shift at Harrington Tower. Elena Parker had the kind of life that people call ordinary, not because nothing had happened to her, but because everything that had happened to her was the kind of thing that happens to people like her. She grew up in a neighborhood where ambition was treated like a luxury. Where kids learned early to keep their heads down, aim low, and be grateful for what they got. Where the biggest danger wasn't crime or poverty, it was believing you deserved more than what you'd been handed. Elena had believed it anyway. She was sharp. Not loud about it, quiet sharp, the kind of intelligence that lives in a woman who learned to read people young because she had to. She'd worked her way through 2 years of community college before the money ran out. She'd held 3 jobs simultaneously before her body gave her a warning it wouldn't ignore. She had survived a relationship with a man who told her she was difficult to love, and she had chosen to leave, not because she stopped hoping, but because she refused to let Lily grow up watching her mother accept less than she deserved. Lily was everything. 6 years old, bright as a match, fearless as only children and fools can afford to be. She had her mother's eyes and something else, something untraceable, a quality of certainty, of knowing, as if she had arrived in the world with a map that no one else could read. Lily drew people the way other children drew houses. She drew what she wanted to exist. Families. Connections. Warmth. In every picture she drew, there was a tall man standing to the left. Elena had learned not to ask about him. When Elena got the job at Harrington Tower, she told herself it was temporary. Night shift. Cleaning crew. 40 floors, marble corridors, offices that cost more per square foot than her entire apartment. She kept her head down. She learned which executives left their trash by the door. She polished the same lobbies over and over while men in suits walked past her without making eye contact. She didn't mind the invisibility. She had learned to use it. She moved quietly and observed everything, and she told herself this was just the season before the next door opened. She didn't know, on her first night, that the door she was about to walk through would change everything. If you asked anyone in that building to describe Grant Harrington, they would use 3 words: brilliant, ruthless, cold. They weren't wrong. But they weren't complete either. The people who had known him before Claire would tell you a different story. They would tell you about the man who used to bring coffee to his assistant every morning without being asked. Who used to leave the building at a reasonable hour. Who laughed easily. Who had a way of making the people around him feel like they mattered. Claire had done that to him. Or rather, Claire had drawn it out of him. They had met in their late 20s, 2 people moving too fast through the world who had the rare luck of running into each other at the right moment. She was a pediatric nurse. He was a mid-level investment analyst with ambition that hadn't yet curdled into ruthlessness. She thought he was too serious. He thought she was reckless. They spent 3 months arguing and 2 weeks falling. They were married for 7 years. When Claire died, quietly, without drama, the way illness sometimes takes the gentlest people, Grant rebuilt himself from the ground up. He stripped out everything that could hurt him. He became the man everyone saw now, efficient, decisive, invulnerable. His office reflected it. No personal photographs displayed openly. No warmth, no mess, no evidence of a life lived outside these glass walls. Just clean lines and cold light and the skyline stretching out behind him like proof of everything he'd conquered. There was one photo of Claire. It sat half-hidden behind a stack of reports on a side shelf, turned slightly away from the door, as if he placed it where he could see it without anyone else being able to comment on it. His family, the Caldwells, specifically, his late wife's relatives, had tried for years to fill the space Claire had left. Vanessa, the elder niece, had appointed herself the keeper of Grant's social calendar and, more importantly, his estate planning. Derek, her brother, had positioned himself on two of the company's charitable boards and showed up at every corporate dinner like a man preparing to inherit something. They were not wrong to position themselves. Grant had no children. No living spouse. No will that had been updated in years. They told themselves they were protecting him. They were protecting the possibility of what they might receive when he was gone. Grant knew it. He didn't care. He had long since stopped caring about things that happened around his life. He only cared about things that happened in it, the building, the work, the deals. Until the morning the boardroom door flew open and a little girl in a yellow cardigan came running across his polished floor. Elena's shift that night had been unremarkable. She had mopped the 38th floor, restocked the supply cart, replaced the paper towels in the executive restrooms, and then taken the service elevator up to 40 to handle the end-of-day cleaning. She hadn't planned to stay long. She never stayed long on 40. It felt different up there. Even the air tasted like power. But her carts were caught on a vent grate near the end of the private corridor, and the jolt sent her cleaning caddy sliding under a small decorative bench near the door marked, Executive Lounge, Private. She had to go in to retrieve it. She knocked first. No answer. She pushed the door open slowly, swept her hand along the wall for the light switch, and found it. The lounge was small and richly furnished. Leather chairs. A low table with a chess set. A bar cart with crystal decanters. One long window looking out over the city at night. The lights were low and amber, the kind of warm glow deliberately designed to feel like a place where important people went to be human for 10 minutes before going back to being important. In the leather chair by the window sat Grant Harrington. Alone. No phone. No laptop. No drink in hand. Just sitting in the dark with the city glowing behind him, looking at something Elena couldn't see. He didn't seem to notice her at first. And in those 2 or 3 seconds before he did, Elena saw something she wasn't supposed to see. A man who was exhausted. Not tired. Exhausted. The deep, bone-level kind that comes not from working too hard, but from carrying something for too long. He sensed her then, because he turned, and the mask came back instantly, eyes sharpening, posture straightening, expression clearing into the familiar blankness. "You should knock," he said. "I did," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for the interruption. I just need to retrieve my caddy." She crossed the room quickly, collected it, and headed back to the door without looking at him again. She was almost out when he spoke. "What floor are you assigned to?" 38 and 39. "Night shift." Elena Parker. A pause. "You came up to 40. The cart will caught on the grate. It won't happen again." She expected a reprimand. That was what happened when cleaners went where they weren't supposed to, a polite, contained reprimand followed by a note in your file. Instead, Grant said nothing. He just turned back to the window. Elena left. She told herself it was an unremarkable interaction. She was wrong. Because 2 days later, she came in for her shift and found that her assignment had been quietly changed. She was on 40 now. All week. She told herself it was a coincidence. She was wrong about that too. Elena had been on the 40th floor for 3 weeks when she started to understand that something unusual was happening. It wasn't that Grant Harrington spoke to her. He didn't, not beyond the occasional curt acknowledgement when she was working late and he happened to pass. But something had shifted in the invisible arithmetic of the building. The other staff had noticed. "He knows your name," one of her colleagues said, eyebrows raised. "He doesn't know any of our names. Not even mine, and I've been here 4 years." Elena shrugged it off. She kept her head down. She was good at keeping her head down. But there were small things. A coffee left on a small break table near the supply closet on 40, placed there in the morning before she arrived. No note. Just a coffee, exactly the way she'd once mentioned she took it during a brief corridor exchange, the kind of conversation where you don't realize you're being listened to. Or the maintenance request she'd quietly flagged, the vent grate that had caught her cart's wheel, fixed overnight before she'd officially submitted the report. She noticed. She didn't comment. She had a child to raise, a rent payment to make, and exactly zero capacity for complication. On the fourth week, something different happened. Elena had come in early to cover a colleague's shift. She was in the building's small employee cafe on the mezzanine level when Grant walked in, alone, no assistant, no phone in hand, and ordered his coffee at the counter like a person who was trying, for 10 minutes, to be no one in particular. He saw Elena at the corner table. He paused. She braced herself, stood up slightly, that reflex of people who spend their lives making themselves smaller around important ones. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly. Just, stated. He took his coffee to the counter and stood there. He didn't sit with her. He didn't leave. He just stood there, and they were both quiet in the strange shared silence of two people who don't know yet that they are already, in some way, beginning something. "You were a student once," he said. Not a question. She looked up, surprised. "Community college. 2 years. Before it ended. How did you?" "HR files," he said. "I review them." Elena held her coffee cup in both hands and met his eyes. "Most people don't. Not for night crew." "I know," he said. And then, after a pause, "What were you studying?" "Social work," she said. "Child welfare services." Something moved across his face. Brief. Controlled. "And now you're here." "And now I'm here," she agreed, without apology. People's lives don't always go straight. Grant looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he set his cup down, nodded once, and left. Elena sat alone in the cafe and tried to understand what had just happened. She couldn't quite work it out. She was still working it out 3 days later when her daughter appeared in the boardroom. It was a Thursday. Elena's childcare had fallen through. With no backup and no alternative, she had made the only choice available. She brought Lily to the building. Against policy. She knew that. But she was out of options, and Lily was a good child, quiet, well-behaved, capable of sitting in the ground floor waiting area with her crayons and juice box for a couple of hours. Elena gave her the rules. Quietly. Clearly. The way you give rules to a child when you need them to actually listen. "You stay in this chair. You don't talk to anyone who isn't me. You don't go anywhere. You don't touch anything. And if anyone asks who you are." "I'm nobody," Lily said. "I know, Mom." Elena winced. She had never meant for her daughter to learn how to make herself small. But she didn't correct her. There wasn't time. She took the elevator up, left Lily in the lobby waiting area, and went to work. What she didn't know was that on that same Thursday, the building's lobby was hosting a small corporate gallery installation. Clean, tasteful photographs displayed on stands near the reception desk. The company's history, decade by decade. Buildings. Expansions. Milestones. And in one of the photographs, taken at a company charity gala 15 years ago, a younger Grant Harrington. Smiling. A different kind of smile than any Lily had ever seen on an adult. Open, unguarded, human. Lily had been sitting in her chair, drawing, when something made her look up. She slid off her chair and walked to the display. She stood in front of the photograph for a long time. Then she turned to the receptionist. "Who is that man?" The receptionist, caught off guard by the directness of a very small child, said without thinking. "That's Mr. Harrington. He owns the building." Lily looked back at the photograph. That was the moment. Later, Elena would ask her what she'd felt. What had made her do it? And Lily would press her small hand to her chest and say, "My stomach did a funny flip. Like when you know something true. Grandma says you can feel the truth before you understand it." She had quietly put down her crayon drawing, tucked it under her arm, and gone to find the elevator. The security guard on the 42nd floor would later tell people that he genuinely did not know how it happened. One moment he was standing by the elevator bank. The next, a small person in a yellow cardigan had walked past him with the confidence of someone who absolutely belonged on this floor, and by the time his brain processed what he'd seen, she was already through the boardroom door. The room full of executives froze. Grant Harrington, in the middle of a sentence about Q4 projections, stopped speaking. Lily crossed the room. She walked straight to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist. She pressed her face against his jacket. "You're my daddy," she said. "I found you." The silence in the room was extraordinary. 15 people, between them holding advanced degrees from 6 universities, had absolutely nothing to say. Grant Harrington looked down at the child holding him. His hand hovered. Something in his chest that had been sealed for years had the feeling of something shifting behind a locked door, not opening, not yet, but moving. "Cancel the meeting," he said. "Everyone out." No one argued. No one ever argued with that voice. In his office, Grant looked at Elena and Lily the way a man looks at two people he has no framework for. Elena stood near the door. Her uniform felt like a target. Her hands wouldn't stop moving. "Mr. Harrington, I swear I didn't plan this." I don't know what she was thinking. "I asked for an explanation," Grant said. "Not a disclaimer." Lily had climbed onto the leather chair and was examining it with pure sensory investigation. "I'm new here," Elena said quietly. "Night shift. I keep my head down." Grant studied her hands. Raw at the knuckles. Nails trimmed short. The hands of someone who worked until the work was done and then kept working. He looked away quickly, as if the sight bothered him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "And her father?" he asked, making the word careful. "Mom says he was someone important." "Someone who left." Elena closed her eyes for half a second. "Lily." "It's okay," Lily insisted. Then she turned to Grant. "But you feel familiar. When I see you, my stomach does this funny flip. Like I already know you." Grant's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted to the shelf. The photograph of Claire. Her bright eyes, her soft smile. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that no one in the building would have recognized. Grief. And underneath it, something older, quieter. Longing. Elena noticed. She spoke softly. "After Claire passed, people said you changed." "I'm sorry. You don't have to explain it to me." "People talk," he said. "They do," Elena agreed. "And they don't understand what grief does to a person. What it costs." Lily climbed off the chair and walked toward Grant slowly. She reached up and took his hand. He flinched. His fingers started to pull back. Then they didn't. Her hand was warm. His was cold. "You don't have to be scary all the time," Lily whispered. Grant looked down at their joined hands, at this impossible thing happening in his office, this small warm hand wrapped around his, and for a moment he didn't look like the richest man in the building. He looked like a person who had forgotten what it felt like to be held. "Tomorrow," he said to Elena. Eyes still on Lily. "Bring her back." "Sir, please. I can't risk my job." "Your job is safe." Lily grinned. Victory flashing across her face. "See? Not scary." Grant almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he cleared his throat. "Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we talk." Elena took Lily's hand and backed out carefully, as if any sudden motion might shatter the moment. In the hallway, the whispers dropped to a hush as people stared. Lily waved at them like she owned the place. Then, just before the elevator doors closed, she looked up at Grant one last time. "Don't be lonely tonight," she called softly. "Okay." The doors slid shut. Grant stood alone in the hallway, the richest man in the building, suddenly feeling like he was the one who'd been caught. Because the truth hit him like a punch, that little girl hadn't just interrupted a meeting. She'd interrupted the life he'd been using as a hiding place. If this story has your heart racing right now, comment, "Still watching." Let's see who stays all the way to the end. Because what happens next will test everything. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Elena and Lily arrived at the lobby. Both dressed carefully, Elena's hair pinned back neatly, Lily in her good cardigan, holding her drawing in her fist like a golden ticket. They stood looking up at the Harrington Tower logo, and Elena whispered a string of last-minute rules. Quiet voice. No running. Don't touch anything. Say please and thank you. Lily nodded so hard her ponytail bounced. Upstairs, Grant had been staring at his calendar for 10 minutes. Pretending he wasn't waiting. When his assistant announced them, his response came out too fast. Send them in. Lily walked in first, eyes sweeping the room with the frank assessment of a child encountering something extraordinary. She crossed the room and slapped her drawing onto his desk. Crayon on white paper, slightly crumpled. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a giant sun. One tall. One medium. One small with a ponytail. Above them, in the careful wobbly capitals of a child learning to write. My family. Grant stared at it the way a man stares at something that has no right to be as devastating as it is. She likes to draw stories, Elena started. It's not a story, Lily said firmly. It's what's supposed to happen. Grant looked away, toward the photo of Claire. Then back to Lily. Like a man choosing which path to survive. You said you had to find me, he said softly. Why? Because you looked lonely. And lonely is heavy. My grandma says you can see it in people's eyes. Grant studied her. Then Elena. It's just you two. Yes. Don't call me sir. Not today. He walked around the desk and stopped a few feet from Lily. Close enough to feel her presence. Far enough to still pretend he had control. Walking into a boardroom and saying what you said, that has consequences. I know. Everyone got quiet like the whole room stopped breathing. Grant's lips twitched. Half a smile, half a grimace. Exactly. She's not trying to trap you, Elena said quietly. We don't want anything. I just want to keep my job and raise my daughter in peace. Peace, he repeated. Like it was a word from another language. One he used to speak. If I let you come back, you follow rules. No more running. No more shouting in corridors. Deal, Lily said instantly. Grant held out his hand. Then hesitated. Then lowered it to her level. She took it without a second's pause, small fingers wrapping around his like they knew the way. And in that moment, something shifted. Something real. Something that had not shifted in this office in years. I want her here tomorrow, too, he said to Elena. As my guest. Not as a problem to be managed. Lily was not simply Grant's guest. She was, as it turned out, a kind of therapy that no one had thought to prescribe. She told him his office was too dark. He opened the blinds. She told him his food was boring. He tried the curry from the food truck on the corner that Elena had mentioned once in passing. She told him he sat too straight. He told her he'd been told that was good posture. She told him it made him look like he was about to fire someone. He'd laughed at that. Quietly, more breath than sound, but real. His assistant, who had worked for him for 6 years and had heard him laugh exactly twice, both times under extreme duress, told her colleague that she didn't know whether to be relieved or alarmed. Elena watched all of this with the careful attention of someone who has learned that good things are fragile. She was grateful. She was also cautious, because she was a woman who had learned that doors have 2 sides, and you don't always know which way they swing until they do. Grant noticed her caution. You don't trust this, he said one afternoon, when Lily was in the corner drawing and they were both pretending to review something. I don't know what this is yet, she said honestly. He looked at her for a moment. Neither do I, he said. But I know it's not nothing. That was the closest either of them had come to naming something they weren't ready to name. Elena went home that night and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed her hands flat on her knees and told herself to keep her feet on the ground. She had a daughter who was 6 years old and a heart that had already been disappointed enough. She had rent and a bus pass and a new job title she hadn't asked for. She had no business hoping for anything else. She hoped for it anyway. Gossip in a corporate building travels faster than the elevator. By the 3rd morning, everyone on the 42nd floor knew about the janitor and her daughter. By lunchtime, the story had reached the 35th floor. By 3 o'clock, a version of it, increasingly embellished, had circulated through the entire building. The version people were most attached to, a child had walked into the boardroom, called Grant Harrington her father, and instead of having her removed, he had cancelled his meeting and walked out holding her hand. Grant had been seen twice in the building's small cafe, sitting with Lily and Elena. He'd been seen holding a door open. People who had worked in the building for years said they didn't recognize the man. And that was the moment the family decided to arrive. It happened in the executive dining room, on the third day. Grant was at a corner table with Lily, who was carefully peeling an orange with the focus of a surgeon. Elena stood nearby, posture careful, still learning the protocol of being in a room where she was simultaneously welcomed and out of place. Then the heels clicked across the marble. "Uncle Grant," a voice purred. Sweet on the surface. Sharp underneath. Vanessa Caldwell swept in the way people sweep in when they've spent their whole lives practicing it. Perfectly pressed cream dress. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. Behind her came Derek, wearing the entitled ease of a man who had never had to apologize for his presence. Vanessa's eyes landed on Lily. Not with curiosity. With calculation. "Well," she said. "So it's true." Grant didn't stand. He didn't greet them. He didn't even blink. "Vanessa." "Derek." "The board is talking," Derek said, pulling out a chair without being invited. "The investors are talking. You've got a child calling you dad in front of senior leadership." "Hi," Lily said, polite as can be. Vanessa leaned down. "Aren't you adorable? And who's your mother, sweetheart?" "I'm Elena Parker," Elena said, stepping forward. Vanessa's gaze moved over Elena's uniform. Slow. Deliberate. Right. The cleaning staff. Elena's jaw tightened. She stayed quiet. She'd learned that answering back to people like Vanessa only made the fall harder. "Watch your tone," Grant said. Vanessa recovered fast. "I'm just concerned. You've been canceling meetings. Letting outsiders roam executive floors. I don't care how it looks." "You should," Derek said. "We've held things together since Claire passed. The estate. The charities. The board relationships. And the future." There it was. Legacy. Money. Control. Lily scooted closer to Elena, sensing the temperature drop. Vanessa folded her hands with practiced elegance. "We just want to protect you. People will take advantage. They'll claim anything, a child, a story, a manufactured connection." Grant's face went still in the way that things go still before they break. "You're not protecting me. You're protecting your position." "Come on," Derek started. Grant stood. The chair scraped the floor like a line being drawn. "This child is my guest. Her mother is under my protection while she works here. And if either of you speaks to them again as if they are disposable. Uncle Grant, you're not thinking clearly." "I've never been clearer." Lily tugged his sleeve, voice steady. "Mr. Grant. Are they mad at me?" He looked down at her and something softened, fast, like a match struck in dark. "No. They're mad because they're losing control." He turned back to Vanessa and Derek. "You wanted my attention. Now you have it. But you don't get to decide who belongs near me." As the Caldwells stood there in stunned silence, Elena realized something terrifying and clarifying at the same time. Lily hadn't just walked into a boardroom. She had walked into a war. And the people on the other side had just decided to fight back. Vanessa Caldwell hadn't gotten everything she had by making scenes. She had gotten it by being strategic. She glided out of the executive dining room with her chin up and her smile intact. She waited until she found a quiet alcove behind a potted plant near the building's north corridor, pressed her phone to her ear, and spoke in a voice so low and smooth it sounded like she was ordering champagne. "Do it clean," she murmured. "No mess. No witnesses who matter." The plan was elegant in the way cruelty often is when it has had time to be refined. One of the private guest suites on the 39th floor was arranged for family and close associates of the Harrington estate. Inside, on the vanity, a jewelry case was placed. A velvet pouch. Heavy. Unmistakable. Then a nervous staff member, the kind of person who couldn't afford to say no to someone with Vanessa's connections, was dispatched to find Elena in the service corridor. Elena was on her shift. She had just finished the 4th floor of her rotation and was heading back toward the supply closet when the staff member appeared. "Miss Parker. Could you help me carry these linens upstairs? My back is killing me." It'll only take a minute. I still have my assigned floor. Just one trip. Please. Elena sighed the way tired people sigh when they're always being asked for one more thing. She followed. On the ride up, the staff member chatted too much and laughed too loudly. She bumped against Elena's cart once, twice, and on the second bump, a garment bag slid from the top of the linen cart across to Elena's cleaning tote. Elena didn't notice. Because honest people don't walk around expecting traps. 10 minutes later, she returned to her assigned floor and went back to work. Wipe. Scrub. Rinse. Repeat. The rhythm of a woman who found dignity in doing her work well. Until the voice cut through the corridor. Stop right there. 2 security guards. Faces stiff. Radios crackling. Elena's stomach dropped before she understood why. We need to check your bag. My bag? Why? What's? Just open it, please. Elena's hands shook as she unzipped her cleaning tote. The hallway seemed to tilt. There it was, wedged beneath her gloves and disinfectant wipes. A velvet pouch. The guard opened it. The diamonds inside caught the corridor light like tiny knives. Elena's breath left her body. That's not mine. I didn't, that's not mine. A voice drifted in from behind the guards. Oh my, Vanessa said, pressing a hand to her chest. There it is. I truly didn't want to believe it. Derek stood just behind her, wearing the smug expression of a man who had never in his life been punished for cruelty. I didn't steal anything. I swear on my daughter's life. Using the child now, Derek muttered. Ma'am, we have to file an incident report, a guard said quietly. Call Mr. Harrington, Elena begged. He'll know I wouldn't. Mr. Harrington is in meetings, Vanessa said smoothly. And frankly, he's been quite distracted lately. My daughter is upstairs. She's waiting for me. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before putting your hands in places they don't belong. Elena grabbed the wall to keep her knees from giving way. She pressed her eyes shut, fighting the tears, because she would not give these people the satisfaction. And then, from down the corridor, a sound worse than anything Vanessa had said. Mom. Lily stood at the end of the corridor. She'd been sitting in the waiting area, humming over her crayons, when something pulled her out of her seat the way things pull children who haven't yet learned to ignore their instincts. She'd followed the feeling. Down the corridor. Around the corner. And now she stood there, frozen. Her drawing crumpled in one fist. Her eyes moving, from the velvet pouch in the guard's hand, to Vanessa's face, to her mother's face. Elena tried to smile. Her lips shook. Baby, go back to the chair. Please. Lily looked at Vanessa. And Vanessa, for just a fraction of a second, made the mistake of letting her expression settle into satisfaction, the flicker of someone who had gotten what they wanted. Lily saw it. Children see everything. We just assume they don't understand what they're seeing. But Lily Parker was 6 years old, and she had grown up in a world where she had to read rooms, read people, understand the difference between kindness and performance. She understood. Security began to escort her mother toward the service elevator. The doors dinged. And Lily watched the elevator swallow her mother's last words. For half a second, just half a second, Lily Parker looked like every child who discovers the ground beneath them is not as solid as they thought. Then her jaw tightened. She spun on her heel and ran. Not a playful run. Not a child's run. A mission. Down the corridor. Past stunned assistants. Past men in suits who didn't know what to do with a small girl carrying a giant truth. She burst into the executive area and found Grant's assistant at her desk. You can't go in, honey, he's on a call. My mom is gone. They took her. They said she stole. She didn't steal. They're lying. Vanessa did it. She hates us. She wants us gone. Lily pushed her my family drawing forward like evidence. Her hands were shaking. Please, she said. Please tell Mr. Grant. The door flew open before the assistant could respond. Lily ran straight to Grant and grabbed the front of his jacket with both fists. They took my mom. They're saying she stole diamonds. She didn't. She smells like lemons and soap, and that's not what stealing smells like. The phone call went silent. Grant stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. What did you say? His voice was not loud. It was worse than loud. Flat. Precise. The voice of a man who had gone very, very still inside. Security. Diamonds. Vanessa was there smiling. Like when someone pushes you and then tells the teacher you fell. Grant's eyes went to his assistant over Lily's head. Service corridor near the guest suite, sir. Grant's jaw flexed once. He grabbed his coat. He paused, because Lily was still gripping him, trembling. He crouched in front of her, eye level, the billionaire suddenly looking like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. Listen to me. You did the right thing. You hear me? I don't want my mom to disappear. She won't. His hand settled carefully on her shoulder. Solid. Protective. Not while I'm standing. He straightened. Turned toward the door. Call legal. Call head of security. Now. Then, to Lily. Stay right behind me. No running. I can do that, Lily said. Grant opened the door and walked into the hallway like a storm wearing a suit. And as they moved, the powerful man and the small girl with the crumpled drawing, every person who saw them felt it. This wasn't damage control. This was a rescue. In the security office, Elena sat with her hands folded in her lap. Not because she was calm. Because she had decided that if she was going to be stripped of everything, she would be stripped of it with her spine straight. Vanessa stood near the door with the patient expression of someone who had already decided how this ended. Derek leaned against the wall, checking his phone. Then the door slammed open. Grant walked in. Lily came right behind him, fingers locked onto his sleeve like a lifeline. Play the footage, Grant said. Sir, the cameras near the guest suites have a limited angle. Play the footage. His voice didn't rise. It sharpened. The way a blade sharpens, not louder, just more precise. The guard played the footage. The truth, which had been waiting patiently in a digital file, spilled out on the screen frame by frame. The staff member approaching Elena in the corridor. The chatter. The strategic bumping. The garment bag, there, clearly, unmistakably, draping itself across Elena's tote. Elena, oblivious. Because she was an honest person and honest people don't see traps coming. And then, a separate angle, Vanessa in the corridor. Watching from a doorway. Phone in hand. Expression unreadable but unmistakable in context. Frame by frame, Vanessa's smile disappeared from her face in real life as she watched herself disappear from the screen. Elena covered her mouth. Lily pressed closer to Grant's arm. Grant watched with the stillness of someone who had already processed his emotion and arrived on the other side of it. He turned to Vanessa and Derek. Out. Today. You're done here. And if you come near either of them again, if you send anyone, make one call, so much as mention their names to anyone associated with this company, my lawyers will make sure you regret the day you learned my name. Uncle Grant, you're overreacting. I'm reacting to cruelty. There's no prefix for that. Vanessa looked at him, this man she had known her whole adult life, this man she had orbited for years calculating his worth, and she saw something in his face she had never expected to see. He was done. Not angry done. Not reactive done. Finished done. She and Derek left. No final word. No graceful exit. Just heels on marble and the sound of a door closing. When they were gone, Grant turned to Elena. She was still sitting. Still holding herself together with everything she had. Grant crouched slightly so that he was speaking to her at eye level instead of from above. I'm sorry, he said. Plain. Raw. You deserved safety in this building. Not this. Elena looked at him. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she nodded, once, small, the kind of nod that holds a whole conversation inside it. Grant turned to Lily. You saved your mom. Lily sniffed loudly, eyes shining. So she's not going away. Not anymore. That week, Elena was reinstated, but not to the night cleaning shift. Grant had his legal team review her background. Not to investigate, but to understand. What he found was a woman with 2 years of college, a decade of work history that would embarrass most MBA graduates in terms of character, and a list of community references that read like a testament. He placed her in a new role, program coordinator for the Harrington Foundation's Children's Outreach Initiative, the same initiative that had been underfunded and poorly managed for 3 years because no one with genuine investment in the work had been running it. Elena stood in his office when he told her. "Why?" she asked. "Because you know what it's like to need something and not have it," he said. "The people this foundation serves deserve someone who leads from that understanding. You could have done this without any of what happened," she said. "I know," he said. "But I didn't. And that's on me." Lily, listening from the leather chair, said. "See? Not scary." And this time, Grant did something he hadn't done in that office in a very long time. He laughed. Not the polished, controlled sound of a man performing levity. A real laugh, surprised, brief, warm. The laugh of someone caught off guard by joy. Elena heard it and thought of Claire's photograph. She thought of what it must mean to a room that had been empty so long the owner had forgotten how to fill it. She thought of her daughter, who had walked in with nothing but a crayon drawing and the absolute certainty that love was something you run toward, not away from. In the weeks that followed, things happened quietly. Grant spent more time in the children's outreach wing of the foundation. He was not a natural presence in rooms full of small people. He stood too straight and talked too formally and was baffled by the way children would sometimes simply walk up and take his hand without explanation. Lily found this hilarious. She became, in her own unassuming way, his translator. She showed him which children were shy and which were bold. She showed him that the quiet ones often had the most to say if you were patient enough to wait. She showed him that when a child decided to trust you, they trusted you completely, no hedging, no calculation, no waiting to see what you do with the vulnerability before offering more. It was, he told Elena once, the most disorienting thing he had experienced since Claire died. In a good way? Elena asked. He thought about it. In a real way, he said. Which was, from him, the same thing. Elena had begun to know the shape of him. She knew that he arrived early because the quiet of an empty building was the only time he could think clearly. She knew that he kept Claire's photograph on the shelf, not to torture himself, but because looking at it reminded him that he had once been a person who let himself be loved. She knew that under the efficiency and the coldness and the impeccable suits was a man who had simply decided, after the worst thing happened to him, that he would not be undone by wanting things. She knew this because she had made the same decision. Just from a different address. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning that started like every other morning, except that it didn't, Grant Harrington sat across from his attorney and signed a document. Elena was present. She had been told it was a legal formality. She hadn't been told what kind. When the attorney slid the papers across the desk, she read the header and her vision blurred. Grant looked at Lily, who was sitting cross-legged on the leather chair, drawing, already working on the next version of her My Family picture, featuring stick figures in a house with a red roof, a garden, and a dog they didn't have yet but that she had decided was coming. "Is that okay with you?" he asked her. "If I made it official?" Lily put down her crayon. She looked at the document. Then she looked at Grant. Then she climbed off the chair, crossed the room, and took his hand the way she always had, without asking, without hesitating, as if she'd been waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with what she already knew. "I already knew you were my dad," she said simply. "I just had to go find you." The document read, Lily Harrington. His daughter. His heir. And the building that had spent years being cold, finally exhaled. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet. It doesn't lower your blood pressure numbers or flag in an annual review. It doesn't care how many floors you own or how many deals you've closed or how cold you've taught yourself to be. It just lives in you, quietly, like a room you've kept locked so long you've started to forget there's a door. Grant Harrington had been lonely for years. He'd built an empire around the perimeter of that loneliness and called it purpose. He'd surrounded himself with people who needed things from him and called it connection. He'd learned to function at the highest possible level with the lowest possible warmth, and he had told himself this was what strength looked like. He wasn't wrong about strength. He was wrong about what strength is for. Strength isn't a wall. It's a foundation. And a foundation is only worth something when something lives on top of it. The Vanessas of this world will always show up. They arrive with perfect smiles and strategic timing and an incredible talent for performing warmth while calculating advantage. They speak in the language of concern while operating in the currency of control. They know, because they've learned it the way the cruel always learn, that the best time to strike is when someone is changing. Because change is vulnerable. Thawing is vulnerable. The moment a person begins to feel again is the moment they can be hurt again. The Vanessas count on that. What they don't count on is a 6-year-old with a crayon drawing and the unshakable conviction that love is worth running toward. Children understand something we unlearn as we age. They understand that the person who needs a hug is not weak for needing it. They understand that loneliness in someone's eyes is not a judgment on them, it's an invitation to come closer. They understand that truth doesn't require strategy. It just requires the courage to speak it out loud, even in a room full of people in expensive suits who would prefer you didn't. Lily walked into that boardroom with nothing but the truth. And the truth turned out to be enough. Elena Parker spent years learning to be invisible because the world told her that was the price of survival. She kept her head down. She did her work. She raised her daughter in the margins. She carried her grief and her hope in the same 2 hands that scrubbed floors for people who never learned her name. And in the end, she didn't need to be visible. Her daughter was visible enough for both of them. There is something in this story that you already know, because you're the kind of person who watches stories like this all the way to the end. You know what it's like to be overlooked. You know what it's like to do your work in the margins while someone else gets the credit. You know what it's like to carry something heavy without showing how heavy it is. And you know, somewhere deep in you, in the part that doesn't need to be taught, that the truth has a way of finding a voice. Sometimes that voice is small. Sometimes it squeaks on the polished floor. Sometimes it runs past security and throws its arms around the person it was always meant to find. But it always, always arrives. Hold on to that. Because the world will try to tell you, again and again, that honest people finish last. That the loud and strategic always win. The world is wrong. Not every time. Not on schedule. Not always in the way you planned. But truth has staying power. And love, the real kind, the brave kind, the Lily Parker kind, is the most stubborn force in the building. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up for someone you loved when it cost you something? When the room was against you, when the powerful people had already decided, and the only thing you had was the truth and the courage to say it out loud? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And tell me, do you believe in the kind of connection Lily and Grant had? That some people find each other not by accident, but by something older, something that doesn't have a clean explanation? Or do you think it was simply a child who saw what a lonely man needed, and ran toward him? Either way, I want to hear from you. And if this story stayed with you, if something in it landed in a place that needed to be found, share it with someone. You never know who is watching alone tonight, needing to be reminded that truth is not powerless. That honest people don't disappear. That children still know things we've forgotten. That sometimes the door flies open, and the warmth walks back in. Subscribe to Karma's Edge Stories, new stories every week. If this one found you at the right moment, the next one might too. Hit the bell. Share it forward. We will see you soon.